what I want to do tonight is make this a bit more interactive and experiential to give you a more lived sense of what this is. Is that better?
Yeah.
Better.
So, as Mikey mentioned, my day job is essentially to be sort of an academic and really look at this from an academic lens. But what's different about what we're doing and what we're interested in doing is bringing the ideas into practice. What does it look like to live ideas, to translate them into interventions that actually impact human beings on individual and collective levels? So I wouldn't be a professor if I didn't bring a test. So I brought a test. I figured we could start with a test. So I'm actually going to give you 2 pieces of paper, and I want you to grab both because we're going to do an exercise, and then we'll do the test, which is actually not a test. It's a simple assessment to bring a definition of well-being more alive for you. So I have pens. If you have one, grab it. Okay? And I'll have Mikey be like,
Yeah.
whatever you need. So I'd like you to take each of these because I can speak about this, but it's better if we do it a little bit. So you're getting 2 forms. You're getting one that says in search of values at the top, and then you're getting one that says, that looks like an assessment. And if you need a pen, I've got a bunch up here, so. All right, great. So, I want to make this come alive, and I want you to have a sense of ownership about it, and I want it to be personal. And so, I think, the idea of technology in popular culture is often one of something highly impersonal. Probably not so much in this case here in this room, because we invest a lot of time, energy, we're socially fluent with this. We know that technology is not a thing, it's a plurality of processes and gadgets and so on and so forth, so we have a different relationship. But even still, I think on some subtle level, we still externalize it as something out there, or a set of things or processes or gadgets out there. And I want to bring the human component home a little bit more. And so what I'd like to do with you to start is I'd like you to take a look at the paper that has a bunch of values words on it. And I'd like to invite you to take a look at these words as living qualities that you actually live on a daily and weekly basis. And I'd like you to go through this list with that in mind. And I'm going to ask you to do 3 things with it. The first is to go through this list. Take a look at the value, nice value, but doesn't really resonate with me, cross it out.
Wait 1 second, Neil. Are there more of the, anyone have more of the list one? With the grids? I think yeah. Oh, you have one? Are these all almost? Oh, great. Okay. Who needs these ones with the boxes?
Great. So, with the values, you're going through the first time and you're saying, nice value, doesn't really resonate with me, cross it out. So take a minute to do that.
We have the instruction again, please?
Yep. So you're going to go through the list of values. First time, you're going to go nice value, but it doesn't resonate with me. You're going to cross out. any value word that doesn't really resonate with you. Doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it doesn't really resonate with the core of who you are and what you're about. So, as you go through, the first pass is subtraction, crossing out the values words that don't really resonate with you. The second time around, I want you to do the following. Of the values that are left, I'd like you to circle the 10 that do resonate with you most. So after the first pass, go through again and look at the values that are there still. And circle the 10 that resonate with you most as your second pass. You ought to have 10 values that really do resonate with you. They really do represent what you're about. And I want you to go further. I want you to take those 10 and I want you to distill them down into 5 that meet the following threshold. These 5 values define me. These 5 values define me. Or another way of putting it is these 5 values, they animate my life. And I'd like you to put those in no particular order in the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 slot. It's not rank order. It's just these are the 5 that define me. They animate my life. This is what I'm about. I'm willing to go to bat for these values. They matter. What you're doing right now is you are taking something that you have known for years, decades even, and you're simply reflecting on it and making it explicit. And in fact, what you have in your hands is 1 to 2, depending on how you define these values, of the 4 pillars of human flourishing. And that is meaning making and purpose. And so what I'd like you to do with this list, once you've identified and distilled the 5 that define you, I'd like you to think about what does it look like to live this value? Yes, you have a definition for it, and that's important. But more important in this context is what does it look like for you in the context of your life today, tomorrow, this week, to live it? Now, from that perspective, I'd like you to do the last thing with this. So here's one of our iconic examples of technology, pervasively influential in our day-to-day lives. Okay? So think about technology alongside of these values. What does it look like to live these values? And here's my question and challenge to you. I want you to specify one way in which technology, as you understand it in a common vernacular, has enhanced your living of each of these values, and one way in which technology has degraded or blocked your way of living one of these values. So I'd like you to just take a look at this list and say, okay, I have a sense of living with the value of relationships. Okay, I get that. I connect really, it matters to me. It's at the core of my being to connect with human beings, to have meaningful conversation, to have a felt sense of intimacy. What's one way in which tech facilitates, amplifies. For me, speaking with my daughter on video chat 3,000 miles away, big time. Really amplifies. Okay? One way in which it degrades, right? It's simple. It's like simple analysis to take time and look at our values and then ask this question. I want you to do that simple yet very important analysis right now for each of these values. This is simply a form of taking honest inventory. These values define me. I have a sense of what it looks like to live them. And I am being honest about how technology can amplify and or degrade the manner in which I live these. We want to make it real, we want to make it honest, and we want to make it intimate. These values are what are in the interior of us. So what I'm starting with at this point is that I want to dispel the myth, the idealization, the exotification of technology and its role in our lives. In most cases, technology is very banal, is very simple, like lights on, types of construction methods, ways of moving information back and forth. But my sense is that's not really the type of tech that we're talking about when we talk about transformational tech in the context of consciousness. We're talking about the promise of exponential tech. That sounds amazing, right? Exponential tech. I remember exponents from like when I was a math teacher. It means big. Like I remember the graph, it goes like this. That's cool, right? There's like singularities and things like this, right? Exponential sounds cool. But please understand that when we talk about it in the context of human flourishing, we are talking about it primarily through the lens of your first-person, subjective, phenomenological experience. How do you perceive it? How do you feel about it? How do you experience it? And how does it influence your perception, feeling, and experience of it? Does it nudge you in one direction versus another? Does it create adaptive or maladaptive patterns of behavior and or addiction, actually? And so I want to put a very human face on it because I think that rooting it in our sense of values and purpose, the very core way in which we make meaning in the world, is the right place to start, the essential place to start. Second, I'd like you to take a moment and I'd like you to turn to the person next to you, and I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of a thought experiment. And that is, if what you understand as complex technology, something like this or some other variation of this, or I could put on VRAR goggles, or I could put on a heart rate variability monitor, monitoring tech, sensing tech, right? Algorithmic tech that helps visualize interesting patterns. If all of that disappeared completely, let's keep the simple stuff, like there's light and there's structures that keep us out of the wind and rain. Let's keep that. But let's say this complex tech, let's say it disappears for a moment completely. I want you to pick one of your core values and talk about how your living of it is altered. I'm not saying it's going to be altered necessarily one way or the other. It's probably a mixed bag. I just want you to investigate how would your relationship and living of that value change. So have a 2-minute conversation. You're kind of in rows, so you might need maybe a minute and a half or something. Here's my value. Here's how I understand it. If the idea of complex technology disappeared completely off the face of the earth for the next minute and a half, here's what it would look like in my life to live my life and live this value. You get what I'm asking you to do?
Yeah.
Right? It's a thought experiment. And so just turn to the person next to you. If you're across rows, maybe the people across rows can turn to each other. So ideally 2, if not 2, then 3. And have a 2-minute conversation in each direction. Go ahead. I submit to you that the promise of technology remains unfulfilled unless and until its addition in your life does more than what you just talked about in your thought experiment. I submit to you that the promise of technology remains unfulfilled unless and until its addition in your life does more than what you just talked about in your thought experiment. That is, I as a human, complex tech free, experiencing my core value of human relating. If tech in that domain and its addition into my life does not add value above and beyond its absence from my life, I submit to you that there's something that is unfulfilled in its promise. It's a little oversimplified, but I think it's an interesting litmus test. This is radically human. So I want to give you a very complex 3-part definition of tech, not really. But at least it's good for us to have 3 sort of cornerstones of what technology is. In the area of science and technology studies, this is a pretty standard sort of tripartite model. Technology is 1, a scientifically grounded means to fulfill a human purpose. Tech is, at its core, applied science for some specific purpose. Element 1. Element 2, it's an assemblage of practices and components, often put together in novel ways. This is where much of innovation comes from. Simply the reaggregation of the parts in novel and new ways for different purposes, or for the same purpose in different ways. And the third piece, this is the formal sort of technical part of the talk, right? The entire assemblage of devices and engineering practices available to a culture. That there's something about the totality of it in relation to each other as a system that shapes the system or systems in which it exists. And so if we use this simple definition, which is acceptable in any academic circle on the rigorous study of science and technology, right? There might be different perspectives, but this is the core set of perspectives. If this is in fact a credible view on what technology is, the question that Mikey and I often debate or ask, whether we're hanging out in hot tubs at Esalen or wherever, is how do you change the perspective on what technology can be and the purposes it can serve, right? That's really the question. And Mikey's got a great mantra, right? I'm sure you all have heard it before. I'll let him say it since he owns it. I have to pay him every time I say it.
He's so cheap. You are what you build, and you build what you are.
Say it.
You are what you build, and you build what you are. May the engineering be with you.
So I think the first time Mikey said that to me, maybe, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago. I thought, that sounds nice, very Yoda-like or something, right? I didn't know quite what to make of it. But we have been in sort of continual conversation. And one of the classes he teaches, and another one that we co-teach, is called Designing Wellbeing. It's basically how do you look at the design process to create tech that supports human flourishing and well-being. This was one of the brainstorms that came out of the class, a set of design principles for well-being tech that supports human flourishing. And I think it's an interesting place to sort of have a little reflection. Meet people where they're at. The technology should support flourishing. The human experience is central technology and service to users rather than vice versa. Only as much technology as needed. Universal accessibility. Do not use the use of technology.
It's a question without a question mark.
Yeah. Does the use of technology increase, decrease the reliance on tech? So does it enhance or decrease your addiction or reliance on it? I think it's an interesting set of principles. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but that's the useful thing about a set of principles like this, is it's to provoke thought, right? So if we have a simple definition of what technology is, and if we take seriously the mantra that we really need to look at who we are when we build tech and how we build tech, then I think the most important factor, and I know you share this opinion, of creating the relationship between human flourishing and tech is to help humans flourish and develop themselves. Period. The thesis is that humans who spend time developing the capacity to flourish in themselves are more effective builders and makers of technology that will engender it in others on the individual and group level. It's a simple thesis, but I think essential. Essential. Yeah.
Is it okay to ask questions?
Sure, why not? I don't know. If you were in my class, I'd say of course, but.
This is your class, Aneel.
Thanks, Professor. So.
Wait, let me give you a microphone.
Oh, sure. So I'm really struggling with this because I think we all have the same question and are thinking about the same things.
Yeah.
Because technology is built by business. And so business systems have fundamentally different principles than human flourishing systems.
Yeah.
And they're misaligned, right? And there's a lot of dissonance between, the reason why technology is in our hands and we're feeling so at odds with it is because it's psychologically designed to keep us in it, because that creates more money for the business that built it. And so I'm really struggling because I'm looking at these and I'm like, yes! And then yet I'm still looking for the red bubble on my text message to see if my friend texted me, because I'm designed to think that that red bubble means information, and that's like the verification that I'm good or whatever, the things that you need as humans. I would love to hear, and maybe you're getting there, so forgive me of jumping ahead.
I agree with everything you said except the last piece, which is I don't think you're thinking about the red bubble. I think you're feeling about it. Yeah. And it's much faster in your neurocircuitry than thinking. And that's why it's so, can be so insidious, right? Because you're actually feeling dopamine hit, boom, automatic, right? Reese and I were just chatting a little bit before, and this was one of our key points I think that we touched on. We didn't unpack it further. So I'll say this. Absolutely. The economic question, the fact that we live in an attention economy where you earn money in large swaths of business by capturing and holding attention is absolutely real. Okay? Absolutely real. And so I think it is overly idealistic to say that we can transcend these market forces and just build this tech in this way. No, I don't believe that. I think the force of your point is well taken. I would respond to it two ways. One, the hegemony of Facebook is tenuous. It being the dominant force and the number one thing is more tenuous in the social networking world than I think we think.
Yeah.
Right? Now, one always wants to ask how far does one want to test an NDA? Let me say it this way. I think that there are a lot of people in the big five, okay, Apple, Facebook, etc., who understand that they have to reckon with this question centrally. Because it's not a far-fetched idea that they could be sanctioned in an analogous way that cigarette companies were. I'm not saying it's apples to apples comparison. I'm not, okay? What I'm saying is that technology has a multiplicity of effects, since you're asking this question. So that's a regulatory question. It's not a market perspective, right? On the other side of it, I would say this. If we don't change our basic economic superstructure, we're fucked anyway. Honestly, if we rely on a consumption-based, profit-driven, zero-sum game, win-lose economy, we fuck ourselves big time, to put it technically. Right? And so I would say, in order to move to a game B economy, as some people call it, which is a infinite game, win-win, value-driven economy, then what we need is the very same thing, which is more human flourishing on the individual and collective level. We need human development. To be able to do that, we've got to develop ourselves. And I would say more specifically, we need technology that engenders awe, AWE, because awe, experiences of awe, right across the bay in Decker Television Lab and other folks. The experience of awe, the grandeur, wow, majesty, among many other experiences, gives us a sense of humility and smallness that, oh, by the way, leads to dramatic increases in pro-social behavior, as measured by standard behavioral economic games. I will actually be more pro-social. I will trade my self-interest, as narrowly defined, in support of larger interests of the group if I'm primed in certain ways. So, it's not a full answer, but it's a start. Fair? It's a perfect segue to the second piece, which is, okay, great, Aneel, you're talking about this capacity of human development, but what is human flourishing, right? That's where the assessment comes in. So I'd like you to take 4 minutes, 4, maybe 3, to fill out the second piece, and I'm actually going to invest that time in you filling it out because I think it matters for you to actually take a self-assessment. It's not a perfect assessment, of course not, it's imperfect. But it's one of the gold standard paper pencil assessments. So take 3 minutes, fill it out. 14 items. The 14-item assessment touches upon, imperfectly, 3 of the 4 large factors, okay? And here's a quick scoring of it. Items 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3 are one of the 4 key factors, and that's emotional well-being. And if I were to define emotional well-being, very simply, it's this. Do I have the ability to generate positive emotion? It is positive emotion balanced. You have the ability to generate positive emotion, in this case, joy, happiness, satisfaction, and so on. In order to have human flourishing or well-being, you need to have checked almost every day or every day in one of the boxes. If you checked it in 2, great. If you checked it in 3, even better. You only get 1 point for this section. If you didn't check almost every day or every day for number 1, 2, or 3, you don't get the point. We're being honest with ourselves, right? Now, the reason is interesting. Early on in the research, researchers overvalued positive affect or positive emotion. It's actually not as important as first thought, but it is important. Okay. The second cluster, and the first cluster is often called hedonic well-being, or in this case, emotional well-being. The second cluster are items 4 through 8. And this is social well-being. More specifically, we're looking at particular domains of social well-being, such as contribution, integration, growth, acceptance, coherence. The elements that contribute to a sense of community, to a sense of mutually beneficial and caring relationships, to a sense of I exist in a world in which I think I can belong and make sense of. So if the world goes out of sense-making capacity for you, let's say, for example, you have a really weird leader who impacts your daily life, or at least your perception of it, that impacts your well-being. It does. We're not inoculated from it. This is the social domain. It's the first aspect of the eudaimonia component. Now, the last domain, 9 through 14, is the psychological well-being. Acceptance, mastery, relationship with others, growth, autonomy, and purpose. This is the part that's been filled out extensively in the last 10 years in the research literature, which is we actually need purpose and a sense of self-acceptance as much or more than we need positive emotion. I'm not saying positive emotion is not important. Depression is massive in its influence in a negative direction. It contributes to a lot of social ills and it costs society a lot. It really is something we need to examine, look at, and help work with. But what you see in a model like this, and here's how you score items 4 through 14, you get a point for each item that you checked almost every day or every day. So for each item, 4 through 14, almost every day you get a point. And the total score for a diagnosis of flourishing is 1 point from the first cluster, emotional well-being, and 6 or more points from social and psychological well-being. So if you have 7 points or more, congratulations. That is the threshold of flourishing. Now, I don't know where we are, but if we are anything like the normal US adult population, 40% of us in this room, actually that's not true, 50% of us in this room, every other person, will be languishing. That's the data. Used in a large population sample based on this exact assessment. So what's interesting is that we are in an epidemic of languishing. And so let me contextualize this. All of medicine and all of clinical psychology, which is where I came from, is oriented towards reducing illness. And rightfully so. It's important. However, the absence of illness does not equal the presence of health. And if the absence of illness does not equal the presence of health, there must necessarily be another domain, and that domain is one of languishing towards flourishing. So if we were to draw a line in space, the horizontal would be illness to no mental illness, or physical to no physical illness. This axis, up and down, would be languishing to flourishing. The largest portion of the US adult population, no mental illness, but languishing. Add in those of us who do have experiences with mental illness, then you get half the US adult population. So these are the three factors. The fourth, I would say, is what we call contemplative well-being. And that is the ability to work with focused attention and awareness. And I think that's increasingly important because precisely what these devices do to our neurophysiological systems and our brain-body systems, right? The key here, I think, in the fourth domain is part of what you all raised your hand about earlier when Mikey said, how many of you have a spiritual practice or a contemplative practice? And 90% of the hands went up. The question is, why do we have such a practice? Right? And I think it goes back to, and is teased in this question of awe and pro-social behavior. Because a contemplative practice gets right at the heart of things, which is our understanding of self. And what awe does is it makes our understanding of self become less fixed and immutable, a little bit smaller and contextualized in many other selves. And therefore, I feel more connected. It doesn't diminish that I have a self or an importance, but that experience of self profoundly modulates my experience of myself and the other selves around me and the world around me. And so what I want to say is this. If we are to create a technology of human flourishing, we have to have at least a working understanding of what human flourishing is. And I would say the next advancement in the study, research, and making of tech is looking at the maker herself or himself or theirself, right? And looking at our own developmental processes as core to the making of the tech. Right? If we really are connected intimately in this way to what we build in the world, and it influences back onto us how we experience, I think this is key. And the phrase I want to just leave you with is just a, this is a made-up phrase in the sense you wouldn't find this in an academic textbook, but I think it's an interesting phrase, which is, in neuroscience, a revolution was hatched in the late 90s. You'll know this kid, she's a neuroscientist. When you looked at neurophenomenology, which is the intersection of third-person tech, like fMRI, looking at our brain, crossed with first-person reports of what I'm actually experiencing. I think the next breakthrough in technology making and studies is techno-phenomenology, which is the intersection of the third-person set of objects or processes in the world intersecting with the warm breath of our personal experience and perception, our awareness. And in order to do techno-phenomenology, we must have frameworks and mental maps of what it is like to be flourishing. This is a model, an imperfect one, but a good one. There are many others. I just want to encourage you to investigate them alongside the processes of creating the technology that is trying to regenerate. So, with that.
Thank you, Aneel. That was amazing.
So I realized, as I do sometimes, that, oh, Aneel, but you finished. Look at that. Look at that timing. Amazing. 12 seconds early. Let's give another round of applause for Aneel. So what I realized is I forgot in the beginning of the meetup for those of you that are new, to give you the full sense of what is happening tonight. So we've just finished the first, a little more than half of the meetup, around two-thirds or so. There's a second part of the meetup, which is often the most engaging, most connective, most exhilarating part, which is called the breakout sessions. And that is where Aneel, and then anyone else in the audience that has a topic that they're passionate about, or a burning question, something that they're interested in exploring with others. It could be a question around the role of technology in consciousness. It could be around some ideas around well-being. It could be around a particular type of technology, whatever it is. But you have some sort of burning question. What you're going to do after we take a break in about 12 seconds is you're going to come up to me. You're going to put your name and your topic over here. And then when we come back from the break, we're going to get a little pitch, like a 20-second pitch from each person. And then we're going to break up into small discussion groups. Aneel is going to be leading one of those groups up here at the front. So if you have questions for him, or you want to dive deeper with him in a conversation format, then you're going to do that after the break. Otherwise, you're going to have 10 other options of topics and people that are also going to be leading interesting discussion. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Awesome. So if you want to lead a discussion, come up and meet me. Otherwise, we're going to take a few minutes break, go to the bathroom, grab a little snack, and then we're going to come back. Sorry, the space is not very sound resistant. So here's what's about to happen. It's going to be pretty cool for those of you that have not participated. So as you've already learned, the community is filled with incredible people that have amazing projects, companies, ideas, past experience, education. And so without fail, the people on this list are always, could easily be giving a talk at the next session. So they're really amazing people. And we're going to be breaking up into groups. And these people on this list are not going to be giving you a talk. They are going to be leading a discussion. So what that means is they are going to be providing you with the burning question, the curiosity, the area of inquiry that they are most passionate about, and they're going to use that as a fuel to help spark a conversation. And they may take a couple minutes to help frame the conversation, no more. And after that, they are just there to be part of a conversation with you with deep roots in that topic.